many of our leaders, we've been in the situation where we have a crisis and people really need us to figure out what to do, and it's hard to know what to do in that kind of situation. So we are blessed to have an impeccable and amazing, a wonderful lady here today. We're going to be having Debby Gullery, who has over 25 years of experience in the field of marriage and relationship education. She's also developed content for and taught seminars on character and core value development, marriage preparation, and marriage enrichment. She's worked for 6 years as the Director of Counseling for the National BFM and currently has her own practice teaching individuals and couples. And on top of all of that, she's also the author of Small Steps to Bigger Love, a practical guide to marriage as a spiritual practice. So as you can tell by that bio, she is very well versed in this topic. She is a really wonderful resource, and I personally am really excited to hear from her today. So please help me welcome Debby Gullery to the floor. Give her a big round of applause. Show her some love in the reactions. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them after. So please, Debby Gullery, take it away.
I'm so glad you guys are here, and I'm so encouraged that we're actually doing this, that there's a forum like this where we can talk about these important issues.
Say we.
So what I'd like to do, because this is a complex issue, I thought it might be helpful to begin with a historical perspective. And I think it's good for first gen to sort of think back, how did we get here? But also for our second gen leadership to really get a sense of how we got to where we are. Okay, Brianna. I don't know. Oh, there we go. There we go. All right. I think it's really important for us to get a sense of our history, because it's actually been quite short. And I think if we look back and see how things have evolved, it gives us a better sense of why we are where we are now. And especially because there's those moments for all of us who are in sort of the helping side of the movement where we get discouraged and we feel like we're not making very much progress. I've been there many times, so I'm guessing that most of you who are on this call have felt similarly. So working in the Blessed Family Ministry several times over my life in the movement, sometimes on the national level, sometimes on the local level. So I feel like I have a sort of unique perspective in terms of how things evolved. So when I look at the history of our movement, especially in terms of the helping side of things, I think that the 2075 blessing was a pivotal moment for the American movement. A lot of things changed after that. So for one thing, we shifted from being a movement of single people to becoming a movement of married people almost overnight. And it was a surprise for all of us. We weren't prepared for the ramifications of that. And because we are an international community, what happened shortly after was we had a huge influx of the spouses of people who got blessed coming to America, which doubled the size of our membership and also created extra challenges because most of these spouses were coming from different countries, which means they were coming from different perspectives and cultures and sensibilities. So a lot of things started to change then. We also went from being, from single communal living, that was the norm. And then all of a sudden we started shifting, couples living together in a house or families sharing a household. And it was a lot of catch up. How do we do this? We went from missionary mentality and also missionary reality, which often meant that we didn't have any money in our pockets. Most of us were living on stipends and receipts. It was receipt world. And then at the same time, we were trying to figure out how to support our families. Oh my gosh, we actually have children now. What do we do? And then prior to the 2075 blessing, our church care system relied primarily on what we used to call IW. So for second gen, if you don't know what that means, it's an itinerant worker, which means that we had some elders, mostly sisters, who would travel around the country all the time. And they would just visit all the local communities and deal with all the emergency situations. That's really all we had. And so, to shift from that to actually developing a system, a blessed family ministry, was huge. And it's not something that we thought about beforehand. First, we all got blessed, and then we realized, oh, we have to do some stuff here to handle it, And so what happened also, once we all started living together as couples, this was also something we hadn't anticipated. All of the challenges and issues that were happening in the world, in the culture around us, started to emerge in our own couples and families. Up until then, we could sort of keep a cap on it. It was like, here and there was, of course, a member would struggle. They would get some vertical spiritual guidance from their central figure. But once everybody started living as couples and families, big issues started to emerge that we also were not prepared for. For example, infidelity, divorce. Really, for the first gen on the call, that when we all first got blessed, we didn't even contemplate that people would ever get divorced or cheat on their spouses. We just didn't expect these kinds of things, but they came, of course, because we had to fix a lot of stuff. And the blessing is where a lot of that stuff was getting fixed. I will always remember my very first counseling session. Well, I say counseling because I wasn't a counselor at the time. I was just in the BFM. And a lot of you out there can relate to that. I'm in the BFM, or I'm a BFM representative, whatever does that mean. And the first person came in, and this was maybe 2-3 years after the 82 blessing. And she was my age, and she had been blessed in the 1982 blessing, and she had an infant, just like me. She was just like me. She sat down and she told me that her husband had left her. Well, I'm sorry, but to be honest, I was so caught off guard. I had not a clue what I could possibly say to her. It never occurred to me that this kind of thing would happen. B, I was triggered because she was just like me. And C, we had no training at all at that time to deal with that. And, big things came up and we really weren't sure how to handle them. We were scrambling basically to respond and to build structures of support on the fly. That's really what was going on. And at that time, the BFM was really only on the national level, and it was basically primarily triage. It was just dealing with emergencies. We still didn't have national or international standards. So we were just trying to, figure it out as we went. So you can imagine it was challenging. The other thing that we realized very quickly after that blessing was that the spiritual counseling, which was what we had relied on prior to this blessing, spiritual counseling we started to see was no longer enough to deal with the complexities of restoration within the family. That also threw us for a loop. We weren't expecting that, but it became very, very apparent to us quite quickly. And it wasn't just happening for our movement. This was happening with other faith groups as well. They were also realizing that their spiritual counseling was not always sufficient to help resolve deep, complex issues in the family level. So, for example, Christians were dealing with this at the same time as us. And during this time, this is when pastoral counseling, the field of pastoral counseling, got off the ground. It had started earlier, but it really started to strengthen during this time period because the need was so great. And pastoral counseling was like a way to blend both spiritual guidance and professional support. but it was new. It was a new field, and we were all trying to navigate it at the same time of helping people. Extra challenge for us, of course, was that the pastoral counseling approach was embraced much more readily by our Western members and Western leaders than it was by our Asian members and leaders. And that was a challenge for us because most of our leaders were Asian and many of our members were Western. And we were trying to embrace a new way of dealing with problems, but we weren't getting very much support for it. Because at that time, it was kind of like satanic. Let me use that word, because that's the word we used to use, to go outside of the church. That's kind of how we were thinking. That is how we were thinking. And I want you to understand what this meant. We actually had 2 BFM departments on the national level. Both of them were in New York, and I was there. One was Japanese and one was Western. Okay, so here's what happened. This is how this played out. Japanese spouses would come from Japan to America, and they would go to the Japanese Blessed Family Department to get spiritual guidance. For example, around the area of beginning their family, doing the 3-day ceremony, big things like that. And they would be getting different guidance than the kind of guidance that the Western members were getting when they came to the Western BFM department. And then those 2 people would get, start their family. You can imagine there was a lot of chaos, okay, because we were still trying to figure it out. But I think I want you to get that. I want you to see this is where we came from. We worked hard. Those of us that were working in the BFM at the time were working against the clock to get more education, but it wasn't always supported. So back in that time, most people didn't go to college unless they were, they joined the church in CARP. So most of us left college to join the church. And the only people that were going to university at that time were people who were asked to go to UTS. So if you felt called to do something like get more education so that you could do your mission better, the mission, by the way, that you weren't getting paid to do, because of course we were all volunteers at that time, it was not an easy thing to do. And yet many of us were trying to do that. So for example, just myself in point, I did a whole year of a master's program in pastoral counseling at the Blanton Peel Institute in New York before I reported to my central figure. Okay, because I was so afraid that he was going to think I was off. But I was also so desperate to get more education that I did it. Do you know what I'm saying? That's kind of where we were at. That's what we were dealing with. And some people had to actually hide their efforts or get special permission. So 2 of the main issues that we were hit with at the beginning of that time period was homosexuality, because prior to that, we were dealing with that as with individuals. And then people got married. People who had a challenge with homosexuality got blessed. And in our naivete, we thought, no, they'll just get blessed and it'll be magically healed. Well, of course, it didn't get magically healed. And we really had to grapple with this issue. And a few people trying to save their own blessings and help others, went with special permission, went outside of the church structure to get more education. And they had to get permission from some pretty open-minded leaders at the time in order to do that. I'm talking about people like Richard Cohen and, anyway. So that's kind of what was going on. It was frowned on to get education in these fields because we didn't trust it. And the same thing with marriage support. We were so used to just giving vertical guidance when people are struggling. It was hard for some of the leadership to trust the other kind of approach. And then I think also from the perspective of the leaders, it was a real challenge for them because leaders up till then had just been giving providential guidance. That was their mission. That was their job description, was to guide the members to accomplish and all the providential things that we were being asked to do by true parents. But all of a sudden, they were also starting to have to deal with, where do people live when they start their family, and how do we help them because we're not paying them, but they have 3 children now. And there were so many complications that the leaders at that time had no experience with dealing with, and so we were making it up. Honestly speaking, we were making it up as we went along. And yeah, the thing is, even though we were trying to do that, the priority all along, the priority was still mostly on providential work. So it was always, the care side of the movement was always on the fringe. It was always on the side. It was never fully appreciated or embraced. So it was really extra challenging. And, I would say it's not that different today. Okay. I see that most of we're starting to shift our priorities, thankfully, and that's made a lot of difference. But in terms of guidance, education, and support, I would say many of our pastors, youth pastors, and BFM supporters don't have any training in either providential leadership or pastoral counseling and church development. And yet, they are often still expected to provide both in their volunteer free time for free. So these are things that are important to understand. This is where we are at. This is what we've been dealing with. We haven't made pastoral care a priority up until very recently, Even, for example, youth ministry. Youth ministry, how young is our youth ministry? I mean, we really only started developing youth ministry when all the kids of the 2075 blessing hit adolescence. And then all the parents were like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? How are we going to keep them safe? How are we going to prevent them from dating? Oh my gosh. And so we quickly, put together youth ministries. We just rallied together. We didn't have any experience, but we cared and we tried. And so all around the country, that's what happened. Parents started to develop youth ministries, and eventually we went from parent-run youth ministries to youth-run. But that was a process, and it's literally only 20 years that we've been doing youth ministry. So that's why it's important to have that perspective. The reason we're not that good at it yet is because we've only been doing it for a short period of time. And we're still learning. It's an ongoing transition that we have been part of, going from a single messianic movement to a family-centered one. That's the process that we've been working on, and we are still in the process of trying to create a better balance of doing both. And so for anybody, all of you who are in the helping profession, that's been one of our biggest challenges, is to make the balance a little bit better. I do think that we've come a long way in the last short period of time in terms of developing education and resources. But again, some of the things that we have developed, I was working in the national level maybe 10, 12 years ago. That's when we actually developed blessing education. Prior to that, there wasn't any. Do you see how short a period of time it is? Matching supporters. High Noon has been an amazing breakthrough in our movement, I think. What a contribution and what an example of victory, of what we can do when we put our minds to something. This is a problem. We're going to work with it. We're going to take it on. This is one of our crowning glories in our movement. And it's a hopeful thing because we could see that we can really make a difference. When I was working in the BFM before Crescentia, we tried to have marriage workshops, but there was no spiritual space for it. Everybody was suspicious of it. Nobody would come. Nobody wanted it. It was the strangest, weirdest time. Now, amazingly, we have marriage workshops, we have national devotions, we have witnessing support. But keep in mind, most of this stuff has only been developed in the last 15 years. That's crazy when you think about it. That's what I really want you to understand. Okay, this is why we are where we are. So the unique challenges that we as unificationists have been dealing with, one is that we've always had a messianic mission, and that messianic mission has always informed our priorities and our choices. Two, we're very young, which means we have few resources, hardly any money. And, we're just young, so we're still learning. We're building, we're still building. Three, we've had extremely high standards and expectations, like really high. And that has made things difficult for us. In some ways, because we fell short of those high standards and expectations, instead of getting more motivated, we lost power. And so that has been a reality, I think, in the American movement. Also, of course, we had a very unique matching process and a blessing process. So that was a very unique thing that we were dealing with. And we had an extremely and wonderful intercultural community, which was a blessing and a beautiful thing, but created a few more challenges. Okay, so we're unique and we've been working really hard. Okay, so before I go to just hopefully this sort of overview has given you some sense of how we got to where we are at, why we're not further along, and what efforts have already been made, because we've been working hard, flat out, to improve this. And now we have many more of you involved, which is very, very encouraging. So it's extremely hopeful. So now I just want to shift and start talking about dealing with crises. But when I think about dealing with crises, I don't think about what do we do in the moment when there's a crisis. I think it's important for us to look in a larger way at it. So what can we do before the crisis, during the crisis, and after the crisis? That's really, I think, a healthier model for us to look at in terms of crisis dealing with. So let's just talk about before the crisis, because I think there's a lot of things that we can do before the crisis happens in terms of building community. And a lot of these things I know have been tried already. So it's not like I am not coming from a place of criticism or judgment. I've tried them myself, and it's not easy. We're trying new things. It can be really, really challenging. But the number one thing I think we can focus on better is to create a web of support in our community of faith, whether it's a teeny tiny community of 5 couples or a huge, community like in Westchester, New York, or California or New Jersey, where there's, 300 families. It doesn't matter. Within that, we have to start the process or continue the process of building a web of support. A web means lots of different things that we can draw on that will create support for each other. One of the most important things is to offer more education on the local level and nationally. Clearly, the national level has really made progress in this way. It's awesome. The Blessed Family Ministry website is just incredible, and the resources that are available there are amazing. Locally, it's a little challenging, again, because we don't have the resources, we don't have the time, we don't feel we have the education. But even without that, I think it's important for us to make effort to do that. For example, if you're a pastor, you can use the pulpit to address societal and church issues. Why not? I always remember, I wasn't a pastor, but I was at the time the local BFM person in Westchester, which is a very, very big community. And it was right at the beginning when we started dealing with pornography. And so I asked if I could give a sermon on pornography, because I just felt like we had a large Asian population, and it was a scary, scary topic that nobody wanted to talk about. And I thought, well, all these Japanese moms know me, so if maybe they can hear what I have to say. I just wanted to communicate the reality that was going on for our children. And and it was very well received for the most part, especially by the kids. They were like, "Thank you so much for sharing about that. My parents know nothing." So that's the kind of thing that we can do, though. I mean, we can't keep our heads in the sand. We can't not talk about important things like racism and the things that are happening in our culture that are also affecting us. I feel like it could be an interesting thing if we use the pulpit to sort of address some of these issues, but also to help educate. For example, talking about, like, to demystify those scary things, talking about pornography or mental illness, huge stigma about mental illness in the country, but also in our movement. So let's talk about it. So the pulpit has possibilities, but also we need to create opportunities where we can study all the basic things that we're all struggling with, like parenting and marriage enrichment and all those things. So again, I know how challenging this can be because I've tried to do them myself. I started an education group about, for parents of teenagers. 5 people came the first time I did it. And this is in Westchester when, we had maybe 150 teenagers in our youth ministry. Okay, so I really get that there's resistance to this. It's hard to put on programs that are not well attended. It's hard to feel confident to put them on because we don't necessarily know ourselves. But you can get a book, you can study it together, you can share. This is the kind of thing that we have to keep trying. We can do. We can create opportunities to keep growing and studying. And it also levels us. We're all the same. We're all struggling with the same thing, So create more opportunities to study and learn. And then, of course, every community has bigger problems, and we need to create and sustain support groups to deal with those things. For example, our widows and widowers. That's a very unique thing, and that's something we have to take responsibility for. Or right now I'm dealing with one of my clients' spouse has Alzheimer's, and I've been working with him for a long time. This is becoming a common thing, or just dealing with a partner who's getting older, or when you have children or a spouse who has a mental illness or a serious disease or an eating disorder. All of these things are really big, and we can't absorb all of that in a local community. So in these cases, we need to try to build support systems that are larger than the local community. And we have done that. We do have a history of having done that. Big challenge is to sustain them. So now, one thing that we've learned, though, from COVID is that we can connect to people from everywhere. So we need to make effort. If we can't meet the needs of our brothers and sisters on the local level, then let's expand. Let's work on the sub-regional level. Let's work on the national level. If my parishioner is the only person who's lost her spouse, then let me see who else in the sub-region has had that experience. And maybe I can encourage them to start meeting virtually and just create some support. These things are viable things that we can all work on. I already said that. Okay. The other thing that I think is really important is creating family support teams. And again, I get that some of our church centers are really small and some are really big. So, you can't do everything that I'm suggesting, but there's some things that we can do. And actually, I think sometimes a smaller community can be more is in a position to help more than a larger community, unless they have a structure like creating family support teams. And I just want to say, I think we underutilize our elders and our youth, that these are people that should be pulled into our family support teams. Because when there's little emergencies, childcare, for example, can be a godsend. Making meals for somebody whose partner is in the hospital, driving someone to their doctor's appointments, offering translation to a member where English is not their first language when they have to go to a scary doctor's appointment. Of course, prayer support, social care. There's so many practical things that we can do that doesn't have to all be just the youth pastor, the pastor, or the BFM rep. We need to build teams to work on and also one great thing that family support teams can do is create joy, have parties, do Easter egg hunts. We need a little more joy in our movement, of course. Here's an interesting idea that some people have already tried. I know we had this in Westchester. It is to create an emergency fund, because there will always be emergencies, and we will always need a little extra cash to be able to support a family in a dire need. They might find themselves unable to pay their rent. There might be overwhelming hospitalizations and no insurance. They might be on the edge in terms of their marriage and need to go to a very specific marriage retreat to get themselves back on track. Summer camps. One of the biggest ways that we used our emergency fund in Westchester was to help fund some of our second gen to go to summer camps when the parents couldn't support them, because we understood how important that was for them. So that's another great idea. Mentoring is another place that we've tried it and then we dropped it. We've tried it and then we dropped it. But let's revisit this, because mentoring is a totally free and very helpful way of utilizing your community members. One of the classic examples is, we're good at marriage. I mean, we're good at, we value marriage. So one of the classic things in the Christian world is to have, just to create between newlywed couples and senior couples. How cool could this be? Your first year, all kinds of stuff happens. It's overwhelming and fun and exciting and scary and hard. Wouldn't it be great to meet with an elder couple or even an elder second gen couple every month and talk about it? Like, how's it going? What's your first fight bid? Like, just practical, beautiful support. And also between older and younger second gen. I think some of the youth ministries have already done that. It's very, very powerful. And then I'd like to put a plug in for small groups. We went through a phase in our movement where we started small groups, inheriting from the victory in the Christian world. Rick Warren and all of the mega churches, that's how they grew. Because through small group development, less people were falling through the cracks and more people were feeling connected and getting taken care of. And I can testify to that. I've been in 2 small groups that have come and gone. I was in one that was just for couples. And during that time, my husband and I both had cancer. And I was in a community of like 300 people. So most people didn't know that I had cancer or that my husband had cancer. My small group, every time we met, how's it going? Wow, did that mean a lot? Just these 6 couples know what I'm going through and they care. Do you know what I'm saying? And the other one that I'm in, I'm still in it and I've come and gone. And a lot of us have, like, we left for a year, we came back. The small group keeps changing its configuration, but it's a beautiful, healthy support system. We study together, we talk about important spiritual things, we befriend each other. So I'd like to really suggest reintroducing that if it's possible. And then the big one that I think most of us struggle with is creating lists of resources and referral possibilities. And I would say that's not just within the movement, but also outside of the movement. I'm going to talk a little bit more about referrals in the next section. And also I know that there's a whole presentation about this, so I don't want to go into it too much, but it is a really important thing to know where we can send people before the crisis happens, So for example, when I was in Westchester, I remember one of our members lost her spouse and there was nobody else, or there were maybe just a few other people that had that situation, and it wasn't an easy thing to connect to. And so I did research and I found all the possible non-unificationist places where you could get grief counseling. And that's a small, simple kind of resource that, we can investigate and have at the ready. Okay, so that's before the crisis. Yeah, there's a lot we can do before the crisis even hits in terms of creating the web of support. Mm-hmm. During the crisis, I have to say, on some level, I think that we're really pretty good about in the crisis. We know what to do. We do have some shortcomings, which I will talk about. But in the crisis, that's when we want to be able to rely on the resources and referrals that we should already have at the ready. That's the first thing, right? And then I would say that this is actually one of the biggest challenges we have in our movement, because there's such a stigma still about going outside of the movement for support. And this can bite us in the rear end when we're in a crisis. Okay. So, and I'm not being critical. I understand this. I understand that we worry that the non-unificationist professionals will not understand us or respect us or take our spiritual values and choices seriously. I get that. And that's a reality sometimes. But that's not enough of a reason to not get the help or get your members the help that they need. We cannot anymore let our fears or our concepts get in the way of the health and the healing of our members. So we have to sort of demystify outside resources. I just hate that word, outside resources, you know. And one thing that to be aware of, if you're not already, is that now, you know, this was a much more common problem, say 15 years ago, especially for members who were going for marriage help, to get somebody who was aligned with where their spiritual perspective about marriage. But now the whole field, the helping professions have really changed, and they are really being trained to be much more sensitive to and to respect all the cultural and spiritual differences that their clients might bring to them. So that's an important thing for you to note. There's less reason now to be suspicious and worried about that whole reality. And the other piece of that is we've often neglected to report critical issues because we were afraid. And then what that often meant is that brothers and sisters didn't get the help that they needed. And we've had a history of just putting things under the carpet. Just, this is scary, this is awful, put it under the carpet, let's not deal with it. Or we don't trust what somebody might say, so we're just not going to get any help. And then hope magically that it will get better. And I know all of you on this call have had that experience where you've seen that happen. So I would say, I'm going to give you an example, because this is something that I've experienced a lot of in our movement, not a lot, but often enough, where someone is assaulted. And we are so freaked out by that, of course, anyone would be, that we were afraid to talk to community services, professional therapists, rape crisis centers, police. We just don't want to talk to anybody about it. So we just don't get any help. But we have to be realistic. And I think a rule of thumb is to think, if it was my child, I would want them to get as much support as they can. And you would go beyond your concepts, hopefully, on your insecurities. And what I find happens when we're afraid to report is that people don't get the help that they need. That's the real problem. And that's what we have to change. So we have to work on our attitude towards non-unificationist professionals. Now, the other piece that comes up all the time is we just don't often know when we should refer, especially because the concept of leadership in our movement is always that we do everything. So there's so few boundaries for leaders. It's like, I don't even know what my job description is. Whatever comes to me, I'm responsible for. That's kind of how we function, right? I see some people are nodding, because that's really been the reality for us. And so the idea of referring, first of all, is foreign to us, not to mention combined with the fear of referring. Okay, but we do sometimes have to refer. So here's really a thing that, if there's nothing else you remember from this presentation today, is this: know what we know and know what we don't. Okay, if we could just think about that, then we have a clearer sense of when we need to refer. I have never dealt with a teenager who is cutting herself. So instead of just saying whatever comes to my head, Let me help you find a professional who knows how to work with this situation. Okay, that's what I mean by know what we know and know what we don't. I am just an untrained BFM rep who cares. I have no idea what to say to you when you tell me that your husband is having an affair. And here's the thing, okay? It's okay not to know. It's okay not to know, but it's what we do with that. It's better to not know and be honest about it, but we don't want to drop it then. But then we want to work with our members so that we can help them get the support that they need. We don't have the resources locally. We might not have the resources nationally, but the culture does have some resources. Let's work together. And you know, again, a rule of thumb for knowing when to refer is safety, always safety. Any kind of threat to themselves or others. So self-harm, severe addictions, thoughts of suicide, eating disorders, some forms of mental illness, rape and abuse. These are the kinds of things when someone comes to you, these are things that most often will need to be referred so that they can get professional support in healing and dealing with them properly. And just to give you some language so that you don't feel bad about referring, because I think sometimes there's a bit of guilt there for leaders, because again, we think we're supposed to be able to do everything, even if we don't have the training. So I think you can say really simple things. I don't feel competent. I don't have the education to help you deal with this, but I will help you find a good counselor to help you heal. I will work with you, and I will stay connected to you. I'm not going to just refer you and then drop you. I will continue to meet with you and encourage you and guide you spiritually. And I will always stay part of your support team. That's how we can frame it, instead of, well, you should go see this person and then forget it. And again, that's a very practical thing that we can do with regardless of our personal experience and training. You can sit down with somebody together at a computer and help them find resources, because it's a scary, challenging thing to do for a lot of people, but especially brothers and sisters who are coming from different countries. It's twice as challenging. So that's a really concrete way that we can support. You know, you can look at the Facebook pages of every kind of therapist, counselor, psychiatrist, social worker, whatever, and you can see, you know, where they're at and what they do. And also you can interview them. This is a very common practice. So you can call them up. I'm looking for support in this area. You can ask them questions. If the person you're working with is uncomfortable with that, or their English isn't that good, you do it for them or you do it with them. You support them, you help them. Let's write the questions you want to ask before we get on the call. You can ask them about their specialties. You can ask them about their education. You can ask them about their personal religious background or affiliation. You can ask them if they're willing to take someone's spirituality and faith values into account in the treatment process. We can be in the driver's seat in this case. We no longer have to just think, oh, we can't trust these people. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know our spiritual perspective, so we're just not going to work with them. No, we can look to find the people that we can trust. We can be in the driver's seat. This is an essential thing for you guys to get, and for us to connect it to help our brothers and sisters understand that they can look for the right person. If they don't like the person they start working with, they can find somebody else. And another question that can be really helpful is to ask if say you're looking for a therapist for somebody who has a very specific situation, you can ask the therapist, you know, this person, or if you're that person yourself, you know, I would like my pastor to be part of this team. Would that be okay? And I've done that in several situations where I've worked with other professionals to sort of offer that spiritual perspective. And a good therapist is going to say yes. And if they say no, well, that's okay. You find somebody else, you know. So as people in the caring field in the movement, we really have to shift the way we think and really aim for collaboration. Okay, that's what we can do. Instead of thinking about what we can't do, let's focus on what we can do. We can become a bridge. We can help brothers and sisters connect the inside and the outside worlds, okay? The church resources and the non-church resources, that we can be that bridge for them. We can partner with the professionals that are helping brothers and sisters. And here's an area that is so critical. When someone is working with professionals, we can work with them to debrief all of their fears. So when they, once they start, say you refer someone to a psychiatrist or a therapist for some reason, or even to like a AA or something like some kind of a support group that focuses on a specific thing, that's one side. But the next piece is, so how's it going? How do you feel about that? Do you feel comfortable to talk about your spiritual perspective? What did the therapist tell you that you should do or that your son should do? How did you feel about what the therapist, like this is, you can do the debrief with brothers and sisters so that you can help them lower their fear and do better at receiving the guidance that they might be getting. Okay? And then of course, there's after the crisis. Now, the challenge for after the crisis is, we're exhausted and we're short-staffed, clearly. So often this is an area where we drop the ball. You just do. We deal with the crisis, we get everything together, and then that's it. It's over, and then we just move on. Case in point would be a Sungwa. We are excellent at Sungwas. I mean, we're excellent at we are really good at certain things. We know how to put on beautiful sungwas. But what about after? What about after the sungwa? When people are struggling to know the right way to, how to grieve, when they're struggling emotionally and spiritually and sometimes financially, that's a whole nother thing. So aftercare is crucial. I think follow-up is crucial, especially when resources outside of the movement were utilized, because that's when they need the debriefing the most. And, one of the easiest things to do is just ask questions. Some of the things I've already said. How is your son, daughter, spouse doing right now? Just stay interested in the situation that they find themselves in. Because I'll tell you, one of the things that, because we're a multinational community, we bring to our families a lot of, we have our own ideas about health and healing and growth and medicine, and we have lots of different approaches. And everybody is allowed to have whatever approach they want. But one of the areas that we sometimes get into trouble is, for example, if we have a certain idea about the importance of using medication with certain mental illnesses, but then one of your children ends up needing that medication. So what do? You need support. You need to talk to somebody. Why am I so scared about this? Help me get more informed. Help me go and talk to the psychiatrist and ask those questions that I'm scared to ask. Do you understand? These are big things, because if we don't help them, sometimes they just don't follow the directions that they're getting because of, and I can't even tell you how many times I've experienced this. Because we're uncomfortable, or because our brothers and sisters are uncomfortable, they just don't get the resources and follow up with them the way they need to for the sake of their partners and their children. So this is a way that we if we follow up just with conversation and questions. What are you worried about right now? It's great that she's seeing somebody, or he's seeing somebody, or that you're seeing somebody, but what's still coming up for you? What kind of support do you need now? How can I help you? Just stick with it. And also, I think aftercare is where your family support teams can be especially helpful on the practical level and on the spiritual level. So again, if you have some of those in place already, it can really make it easier for you. And then you can more easily plug people into appropriate and available support systems, whether they're in the church or not. okay? That we can't do it all, and we often feel really guilty about not being able to do it all. But even if we can't do it all, we still also can't drop the ball. We have to keep working to develop structures, systems, and attitudes that are going to offer optimal healing and health for our brothers and sisters. And we can also normalize the struggles that people are going through as part of the human condition and part of restoration. Again, this is an important thing because we feel so much guilt when we're struggling. There's something wrong with me, you know, and we can encourage the journey away from shame and secrecy, where a lot of us find ourselves, and towards taking responsibility and health. And I think that, you know, if we can help brothers and sisters see that getting help when we need it is the smartest and healthiest thing we can do, we can go a long way to shifting and changing the paradigm of fear that we find ourselves in. So just to tie it all up.
And Debbie, just so you know, we have to close the room in 2 minutes, but
Okay.
I love you.
This is the last slide.
Great.
How can we be effective in a crisis? We got to do some before work. You know, before the crisis, we want to work towards building webs of support and gathering resources and referrals. During the crisis, we want to trust professional resources and work with them. We want to focus on collaboration whenever we can, and we want to follow up. And we want to team up, okay, across the country, all of us supporting each other so that we can do better. That's it. Thank you. I'm done.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Auntie Debbie. That was an incredible presentation. So much amazing insight. I'm so grateful that we have you as a resource. So we don't have time for questions, but we did get a lot of amazing ones. And Debbie, could you just put your email in the chat? One person asked for that, and
Yes.
I did record all the questions, so I will get with that, Debbie, and send it when we send the recording. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you so much, Aunt Debbie, for this incredible advice, and I hope everyone took notes, but we will send recordings because there's a lot of good before.
I'm so sorry there's
during,
not time
after.
for questions, but I will put my email in the chat. So
Awesome.
okay.
David.
Thank you
Thank
guys
you so
for doing-
much.